We had already taped the full pod this morning. Then breaking news: the Denver Nuggets have fired Mike Malone, their head coach, and also will not be extending the general manager Calvin Booth with just a handful of games to go and seeding in the West all over the place. It's a civil war up there in Denver. That was the quote that another team had said about the Nuggets to me before the season even started. Just the way you get on the phone and gossip and what's going on here, what do you think could happen here, and all that kind of stuff. And that was something that I think a lot of people around the league knew. There's also a conversation, because I'm sure some of you would think like, oh, now you tell us the Brian Curtis thing, but there's also like a responsibility that you have with certain things where you wouldn't just like fire up a Sunday pod with Bill and be like, hey, another team told me. It's like, you just wouldn't necessarily do that. But now it's all out. It's all out on the table. And so that was the description of the relationship between Mike Malone and Calvin Booth in the front office and the head coach. I don't think this was just about this team being 3-7 in their last 10. I don't think it's just about them being an 11-13 record since the All-Star break. The defensive numbers sinking again. This felt like a untenable situation that apparently had just reached its breaking point, and an unprecedented firing of a coach for a team that's still trying to figure out if they have a chance to pull something off here in the playoffs. But it hasn't felt that way, right? You've been watching them lately. Like, I don't know, the 2 Minnesota games. Even though, the second Minnesota game was a double overtime game, so it's not like they necessarily like got smashed like they did in the first game against Minnesota. So the first one really is more revealing, perhaps, of how they felt about this team. But there's a lot of stuff that we can go through. We know that this team has not done enough to build a roster to maximize the best player in the world in Jokic, and he's been the best player in the world for 4 years. But as much as we can feel that way about not supporting Jokic enough, I'm sure Mike Malone's going, well, you're not doing enough for me either. And I think that's where the disconnect originates from. So if we go through all the transactions that Calvin Booth has had, this is probably where Malone's going, you cannot build out the rest or the back end of this rotation with second round picks as we let vets leave for bigger money. Now, look, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, the money that Orlando paid him, Denver didn't want to pay him. Orlando wanted shooting and defense. Not sure that they've gotten a full return on their investment. So in a vacuum, not wanting to pay KCP that kind of money, I understand it. But then what are you going to do? And Denver didn't want to do anything. They didn't want to keep the asset, even though it was going to become really expensive with the luxury tax, which I think is a consistent theme here with the way Denver makes its decisions. So it may not even totally all be on Booth. Bruce Brown's deal. Well, he was great with them, but they knew when he got to free agency that they were going to be limited in what they could offer him based on the structure of his contract. So they could only offer him $7.8 million in the first year of a new deal. Then they were going to have to do like a 4-year extension. Bruce Brown gets offered 2 years and $45 million. And the way that was structured is the second year was a $23 million team option that everybody's like, well, that's not going to get picked up. This is like one of those Jabari Parker deals where it's like the first year is huge and then you'll figure out the rest of it later. Well, because he was involved in like a trade, he ended up getting the team option picked up. So Bruce Brown made all that money. Denver couldn't pay him that. But then if you're Malone, you're going, okay, fine. We lost an important part of our rotation. I get it. I get the financials. We had no chance. It wasn't like somebody said, hey, we just don't want to pay him. But now what are we going to do? They didn't do anything. Reggie Jackson got a 2-year, $10 million deal. Not that big of a deal. It didn't really give them anything during the playoff runs, but they used 3 second rounders to move him out to save on the tax, which kind of got lost in all the traffic of all of these transactions. Because if you really dig into that one, and they may have gotten a second rounder back, but you're like, what are you dumping all these future, even if I think second rounders are comically overrated, you're still doing that to get off of what? Like, it's not that crazy of a number for Reggie Jackson. We go through the draft picks. Strother, don't know. Pickett, don't know. Hunter Tyson, don't know. Deron Holmes, early, we don't know. A Zeke Naji extension, 4 years, $32 million guaranteed, where the 4th year's a player option. And he's kind of playing, I guess, because they have to play him. So if you look at the Malone and Booth part of it, you go, all right, well, if you're the front office, and this isn't even specific to the Nuggets, right, or the personalities that we're talking about, there is always a divide amongst front office and NBA coaching staffs when the front office is like, you've got to get these guys minutes. We scouted them. We picked them. Everybody likes who they pick. Okay, there's a reason they pick them. I know that sounds really basic, but if you have a bunch of people working around the year selecting a player on draft night, there's something they liked about that guy. They believe that that guy can play, most likely. I mean, unless we're getting down to like the late 40s and 50s in selections. And Malone, like a lot of other coaches, is like, this guy isn't ready. And we're a championship tier franchise. So, I'm sorry, but like, I can't be using minutes to develop some of these dudes. The best teams figure out that balance. And I'm not even saying it's an applicable balance for every single organization, depending on the players that you have. But I think the scary thing is that it's a bunch of names, a bunch of moves, letting vets go and trying to replace it with dudes that normally are not cracking rotations and getting second contracts based on where they're drafted. So Malone, I understand his point of like, I'm not developing guys because they can't play for us right now. But I also understand Booth being like, we drafted them and you just bury these dudes and play the vets all the time. And we have guys that are constantly hurt. So figure it out. I think Malone's feeling himself a bit after the title. I think that's in his personality. Is he wrong to be feeling himself a little bit? He's the 5th highest paid head coach in the NBA, I believe, at $12 million. He's got the only ring in franchise history. He's the only coach that Jokic has ever known. So, sometimes there are these coaches that are name brands. You know who those are, like the real guys, which I wouldn't put Malone necessarily in that group. And some of the guys that are name brands aren't as good coaches as some of the guys that aren't. So I'm not even telling you I have like a huge problem with the way Malone was coaching, because I'm not. I'd have to watch it every single night. And of course, if I watched it every single night, there's stuff that I could pick apart. But I watch him quite a bit. And like we can get into rotations and everything, but I don't think there's anything necessarily like glaring where you're like, this guy's incompetent. He should be doing that. That's just not the case. He would have been fired years ago if that were part of the Malone conversation. But I'm sure at that salary and with the title in his back pocket, he's thinking, you guys need to start doing more for me. And maybe Booth coming in after a change from Tim Conley and this ownership group, it's like, well, look, we pay you a lot and we'll pick the players. Don't worry about it. There's also another part of this that is important to get to, and that's the Jokic part of it. So, Malone had been hinting, I wouldn't say he was like giving up on the team, but he was clearly really frustrated. There was a Blazers loss where he did a post game where he was talking about, hey, some guys are going to get it. The guys that don't give a shit, they're not going to get it. They're not going to watch film. His quote directly was, nobody watches film. So the job of an NBA coach is so hard because even if you're a brilliant tactician, even if you get along with everybody, I think these dudes eventually get sick of everyone. And for this to happen, as you've already heard other places, like clearly if they go to Jokic being like, we're thinking about getting rid of Malone, and he says, absolutely not. Guess who's still the head coach of the Denver Nuggets? Mike Malone. So clearly Jokic had to be okay with it. But, I don't know that there's ever going to be a coach whose personality is designed to survive a decade on the job. It's a miracle he made it this long. So, yeah, I'm sure Jokic was fine with it, but I don't know that that's that unique. I think head coaches in the NBA, even with the greatest minds, the players just tune them out eventually and need a new voice. So the Jokic part of it that we need to finish with here is, his entire 10-year career is with Malone. He'll have to love who the new head coach is. But what if Jokic looks around and is like, look, it's great we won a title, won all these MVPs, generally considered the best player, except for certain TV shows. What if this thing has run its course? What if they have no outs? What if Jamal Murray's actually, I love him, but he's hurt all the time. Aaron Gordon's getting older. Michael Porter Jr. is a coin toss every single night. And then beyond that, like I enjoy passing to Christian Brown. But what if I need in this second chapter of my career to start thinking about myself? Now, I've said this for years. We haven't really had the international player who's decided, I've had it. I'm out of here. It's been an American thing. And as I say that, it doesn't mean I think forever there will never be an international player that decides to start signing up for the player empowerment brochures and saying like, I need out of here. I need to move on. And I'm not even telling you I have any intel on this, but it's going to happen with one of these players soon. And if you look at the surrounding circumstances with Jokic, it would make sense. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he's not. Maybe he just loves Denver and it's fine or whatever. But like this would worry me, like not just the fan base, but if I were ownership, now it's about doing everything possible to make sure that guy's happy. And maybe his demeanor is such that he's somebody that's easy to work with. He's not going to start thinking about himself in a way that sometimes I can understand with NBA players and other times I think it's unjustified. But like that's a really scary proposal because I don't even think it's necessarily about what this postseason is and where they end up. Because I also think there's a part of this where the Jokic media fangs will be out. Hey, I thought this guy was the best player in the world. What if they get blasted in the first round? You start piling on the points to make your point stronger by saying Malone, he's out. And so, Jokic clearly wanted him out of there too. And then they lose the playoffs. I thought this guy was the best player. Like, that's going to happen because that's just the cycle it works. Say they don't get out of the play-in or they get swept or losing 5 in the first round. Like, it's just get ready, buckle yourself up for that one. There's also a thing I don't want to do to Dallas fans, but I'll mention it. Imagine if Luka were still on the Mavs and Jokic said he wanted to do something else. Is there a Jokic-Luka trade that is possible where Dallas could have gotten Jokic instead of Anthony Davis, but maybe Jokic doesn't play enough defense for Nico Harrison. So maybe that's off the table. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not trying to make Mavs fans feel bad all over again, but I am ready to sign up for all the hypotheticals because it isn't going to be about the 25 playoffs. It's going to be about the 25 off season and making sure that Jokic is happy because he would be totally justified in saying, I can't do this anymore if this is what you're going to put around me.